In order to involuntarily commit someone, which is a euphemism for psychiatric imprisonment, the state has to prove by clear and convincing evidence that as a result of mental illness, the person is a danger of serious harm to himself or themselves or others, or so disabled that they are unable to survive safely in freedom. And even if so, they have to prove that there's no less restrictive alternative. For forced drugging, the state has to prove that the person is incompetent to decline the medication, which is a farce all in itself, and that the psychiatric drugs are in their best interest and there's no less intrusive alternative available.
The numbers of people getting forcibly hospitalized and forcibly treated has actually been rising dramatically for decades. In British Columbia, doubling. In Ontario, doubling. In California, 30-day detentions tripled. Child detainees tripled. In Colorado, doubling. Nevada, doubling. Indiana, doubling. Florida, doubling.
Do drugs that we're using for mental health, psychiatric drugs, do they do more long-term harm than good?
Oh, these drugs fix a chemical balance in the brain like insulin for diabetes. We tell people this because it becomes an explanation they can understand as to why they should take the drug.
I was a kid when I was first put on antidepressants, and I just did what the adults told me to do, and I took a pill if I had a headache, and I took pills for what they told me I needed. And so it wasn't until I was 30 years old when I realized I had never had an unmedicated moment as an adult, and I was still suicidal and severely depressed, so something wasn't working here. And so I just decided, okay, I need to figure out how to get off these drugs and discover my baseline. But I went to a doctor who didn't know what she was talking about, and she pulled me off way too quickly, and I was plunged into severe antidepressant withdrawal.
Well, first of all, a black box warning is the most serious of all warnings that the FDA issues. At that point, in 2003, we started going out. 2004, we met a lot of families, and these hearings, it's amazing what the power of people and people like you and I, everyday people who've had experiences, when they show up and tell their story.
49% of Americans have reported having a significant spiritual or religious experience that changed their worldview, that changed them. That's a significant number. That's a significant number of people that have never talked about their experiences because they're afraid of being ridiculed or shamed or having the sacredness of their experience taken away from them. Very often, they're very difficult to describe. And when you do try to describe these experiences, you cannot convey the actual experience.
I was very, very dissatisfied with the fact that traditional psychiatrists call these states altered states. I see it in a kind of a pejorative term that doesn't reflect, how much respect I have for them. But I was particularly interested in these non-ordinary states that are healing, that are transformative, that are potentially evolutionary, and that also have what we call heuristic value, which is that they can bring absolutely new information about the psyche, about the human nature, about the nature of reality. So those would be states that, for example, the shaman's experience as part of the initiatory crisis, or states that native cultures experience in rites of passage or some other powerful rituals, the kind of states that the initiates experience in ancient mysteries of death and rebirth in Egypt and in Greece and other places, the experiences that people have in different forms of yoga, in different forms of Buddhism, the Sufis experience, the Christian mystics, the Kabbalists, and so on. And it was just unbelievable to me that we don't have a special name for them. We put everything into that one bag of altered states, and the implication is that they are all pathological. You see, we don't have a category a spiritual experience, a mystical experience. So anybody who has any kind of episode of non-ordinary states would be seen as mentally ill and would be getting medication and a diagnosis and so on. So when we did a lot of work with these states and we discovered the healing and the transformative potential, we started calling these spontaneous states spiritual emergencies or psychospiritual crises. And so much of our work was actually supporting people who had spontaneous episodes rather than suppressing the experience, was to actually encouraging people to go into it and through it.
I conducted my doctorate research on spiritual emergence, spiritual emergency, and how trauma is connected to this topic. So research has shown that clients do want to have spirituality integrated into therapy. Research has also shown that the helping professions have done a fairly poor job at integrating spirituality into therapy. Most importantly, cultural competence is an ethical principle that the helping professions need to abide by. And there are many spiritual phenomena in different cultures that the helping professions need to be aware of. If you are experiencing overwhelm because of these experiences, and then you are not properly supported, as one should be supported when you're experiencing trauma, which is to be offered a safe, supportive environment, mistreatment of trauma or mistreatment of a spiritual emergency can then be even more traumatizing. Spirituality is a very important piece of the human experience, and I think that validating spirituality is very important.
Spiritual competency is now recognized as a core part of cultural competency throughout the healthcare field. Spirituality and religion really do qualify as aspects of diversity in the same league of importance as ethnicity, race, gender, and sexual orientation. And yet, as we both know from our own training, spirituality and religion are ignored in the main training programs that exist. One of the reasons that we think there has been this oversight is that there is a lack of validated guidelines for spiritual and religious competency.
Which may appear to be mental disorders may in fact be religious or spiritual conflicts. The acceptance of this new category was an important milestone in the growing recognition of mystical experiences